All right, guys. Again, I'm Caroline Valland. I'm the Executive Director of the Governor's Crime Commission. Welcome to our very first Grant Award Workshop virtually. I'm glad you all could join us. When I just looked, there were about 400 people logged on. So thank you all for being here. We appreciate it. Josh, can you unmute yourself and let me know if everything's okay?
For the PowerPoint? Yeah, it's coming up good.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, we'll get rolling. Thanks, everybody. Welcome to 2020, y'all. It's been one heck of a year. Just to start off our big day this morning, all of the Outlook was down for our entire agency, and none of our staff could log in. So it's kind of been like that all year, hasn't it? It's just been one thing after another. I hope everybody gets a laugh, because all we can do with 2020 is laugh. But what 2020 did do was force us to do our workshop online. Wasn't our first choice, but I think none of us want to be stuck in a closed-in space with 400 of our closest friends. So we are going virtual. We ask for your patience. This is the first time we've done this. We recognize it's not ideal. We certainly would rather have the person face-to-face discussion, but you don't always get what you want, so we're doing the best we can. If your workshop materials were on your landing page today when you logged in, but also you can go to our website. So if you go to the GCC website, you will be able to find a copy of our agenda. You'll be able to find the manual. I know you're sad you're not getting that delightful in-person, doorstop that we usually get, but I do want to reiterate how important this manual is. The team works very hard on it. It's actually streamlined this year. I think it's a lot of better presented material. So I hope that you will utilize it as your first point of contact. Also on our webpage, you're going to find a recording of this workshop. So give us 48 hours or so, and we'll be able to download it and post it on our post it online. So if you guys have questions, you want to hear something again, maybe somebody isn't able to attend or has to drop out early, you will be able to go back and access this online. Obviously, not ideal way to interact as far as answering questions, but we're going to do the best we can. In the bottom right-hand corner is a chat panel. It's real important that if you enter a question in that chat panel that you select all panelists. That means that all of the staff that are on the call will be able to try to work to answer your question. So if you do it just to one specific person, I would hate for it to get lost. But if you select all panelists in the chat panel, that should help multiple people see your question and work to answer it. If you have more questions, we are going to try to have Q&A at the end of each session, time permitting. We do plan to produce an FAQ after the workshop, and that'll also be published on our webpage. The FAQ will include all the questions that come in the chat, as well as questions that are asked during the workshop. And of course, I know you all have questions once it's all over, so don't ever hesitate to reach out to your planner if you're still working on modifications and conditions, or once you get your grant open, to work with your grant administrator. Breakout sessions. So I just want to make sure everybody is clear. There may or may not have been links to the breakout session when you logged in. Some people, I think, saw them and some people didn't. We will be posting the links to the breakout session in the chat probably multiple times during the course of this larger session. But just so everybody's clear, you're going to need to, when this larger plenary session ends, you're going to need to log out, end that. Hopefully you'll have enough time for a bathroom break. And then when the time starts for the breakout sessions at 10:45, you'll just log into the breakout session that you signed up for, that you registered for. The breakout sessions are not WebEx events, they're WebEx meetings, which means because it's a smaller group, as attendees, you will be able to speak. So since it's hopefully a little more intimate, there can be a little more back and forth. But be on the lookout in the chat box for the links for the breakout sessions. I do, for those of you that are new, want to give a overview of the Governor's Crime Commission and talk about kind of our four core business units, what those units do. First of all, I'm going to introduce you to Diane Barber Whitaker. Diane is the Deputy Director. Diane's in charge of the planning team. The planning team are the group that works with the federal government and interacts with them. They apply for our federal funding. They also do the reporting that we're required to do for the feds. The planning team also deals with the committee and commission members. Works with them on setting priorities, which is we're going to be announcing those soon at our grant writing workshop next week. Also works with them, helps them to score grants, works with them on voting with grants. And then they work with you, the applicant, to go through the modification conditions process. They want to get you fully federally compliant, so we're ready to open a grant, hopefully come October 1st. Jason Wimmer is the Director of Grants Management. The Grants Management team is the largest team we have. It's grown considerably in the last couple of years, trying to reduce the caseload of our GMs, our grants administrators. Jason is actually going to also be our Master of Ceremonies today. He'll be our MC, so when I'm done with this welcome, we'll hand off to him because we're talking about opening grants and getting grants going, and so he'll take the lead on that part. Katrina Agostino is our Director of Federal Compliance. This is our smallest unit, and it's fairly new. Katrina has a small team. We're looking to grow, but this is the group that gets to deal with our auditors. GCC has had visits, and those of you that have been with us for a while have seen us change some things in the last couple of years. We've had visits from OIG, the Office of Inspector General, OSA, the Office of the State Auditor. We've had visits from the OCFO at OJP, Alphabet Soup, the Office of Justice Programs. So we've had a lot on our plate, and Katrina has been the front line on that. And then last is Tim Parker. He's the Director of the CJAC, which is the Criminal Justice Analysis Center. As subrecipients of our grant award, you probably won't deal a lot with the Analysis Center, but know that they help us fulfill our mission that is supposed to advise the governor and the Secretary of the Department of Public Safety on criminal justice issues. This group did some broad-based research on bail reform, bond reform in North Carolina earlier this year. They have just published the first part of their three-part series on traffic stops in North Carolina. Please be on the lookout for part 2 and part 3. Those will be coming soon. But they are also going to be developing in the next year a data portal that hopefully aggregates data from different parts of our criminal justice system. So hope that will be announced later this year. So then, of course, at the bottom, and not at the bottom, but because they're the foundation for everybody, is our admin team. A special shout out to Nikki, to Miss Betty, to Pat, to Natalia, to Sarah. Those guys, you know, they're the ones that keep us running. They keep all of the other business units up and going, and we are very grateful and appreciate all their hard work. I have a couple of announcements, and then I think we'll be ready to move over to the next part of the agenda. First announcement, and I'm very excited about this, starting this fall. Some of you may have already benefited from our piloting of this, our testing of this, but we're going to move to DocuSign. So no more depending on the United States Postal Service, waiting and tracking green cards for signing and trying to find out what happened to missing awards. Your awards are going to come to you electronically via DocuSign. And then what's really neat is once you sign it in DocuSign, it automatically forwards to the next person for signature. So hopefully this will be much faster. It'll be easier for us to track. We're very, very excited to roll this out. Please note that your project director and authorizing official are the folks that usually sign the old gray sheet, the old grant award. That information must be correct in GEMS. If you have changed project director or authorizing official since you started the application, please go in now and make sure the name and email are correct, because that's what's going to be loaded into your DocuSign. All the supporting documents that come with your award, special conditions and such, well, special conditions will be part of DocuSign. The supporting documents will come as as attachments in DocuSign. There'll be lots of instructions, so I'm just giving you a 30,000-foot view. But the attachments you'll need to download and print and sign and scan and return back to us. But it's all going to be electronic this year. You're still going to have 30 days to get this done. If you think you're not going to get it done for some reason in 30 days, just email us and let us know that you're going to be a little bit late. So excited about moving to DocuSign. Also excited that in the coming months, we're going to be unveiling our online training modules. We're very excited about this. We recognize not everybody can attend these workshops, and that sometimes you just need a refresher on a couple of things. So we're going to be rolling out our online training modules, likely going to be executed through a learning management system. These are self-guided so that you can do them at your own pace, and it's only going to look at the things that you need to look at or want to focus on. At the end, there's going to be a knowledge check to test that you've been paying attention. We're going to roll out and start with 4 modules: how to open a grant, grant openings, grant adjustments, grant reimbursements, and then how to submit a grant application. We're still working on the details of how you access these modules online, whether you sign up via email and receive an invitation or whether they're publicly available. But in the coming months, you should get this. We're very excited that our subrecipients are going to be able to access this. Last but not least, I have what may be the bad news, and it's sad that I have to deliver the bad news. As you know, our grant awards are scheduled to open 10/1 of 2020. Right now, our best guess is that these are going to be delayed. We have not received any official notice that it's going to be delayed, but that is our best guess. The federal government and OJP is moving to a new grants management system. So essentially, the system that we use, that's like their version of GEMS, is going to change. And in 2 days, today is the 16th, the 18th of September, we can no longer access the old system. The new system won't be up and going until, I think, October 12th or somewhere around there. So there will be several weeks where there are where we have no system in place. So if we don't get unless we get our federal awards in the next 2 days before the old system goes dark, we're going to be waiting for the new system to be online. And obviously GCC can't award anything until we receive our federal funding. Again, it's September 16th. We've not received it. The new system is going to go, the old system is going to quit working in 2 days. And so unless we receive it in the old system in the next 2 days, we got to wait till the new system is online. We're going to keep communicating with you guys that are scheduled to open an award and keep you posted as we get additional information. Even as late as yesterday, we were reaching out to our federal partners, and they're just not saying yet whether we're going to get it on the old system or the new system. So just ask you to bear with us as we try to figure this out. That's it. That's all I've got for now. Thank you for your time. Again, I want to thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to hand over to I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to hand over to Jason. Again, Jason is our director of the grants management team, and he's going to be your master of ceremonies for today. Jason, thanks so much.
Well, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. And again, thank you very much for joining us. Again, my name is Jason Wimmer. I'm the grants management director for the Governor's Crime Commission. This morning, we're going to be talking to you a little bit about the management and documentation that you're going to need for your grants. Now, we will be referencing our grants administrators throughout this presentation. So I did want to take a time to introduce a few of the grants managers, especially the new faces that we have. And we have many new faces since the workshop that we held last year. So what I wanted to show everybody is the names that are in red here. These are our new grants administrators. We've been purposefully expanding our grants administration staff so that we can provide better customer service to you as our subrecipients. That being said, when we're redistributing job duties with new grants administrators, we can't always guarantee that you will have the same grant administrator for the entire life of your grant. The grants administrators are responsible for many things: reimbursements, budget adjustments, prior approvals for different types of expenditures, but also for providing technical assistance to you. They will be the ones that you go to for policy questions or for technical questions. They may not always have the answer right then, but they're going to work very hard to find the answer for you. In addition, our grants administrators provide monitoring, and this monitoring for VOCA recipients is in the form of a site visit held once every 2 years. This monitoring allows them to get to know you a little bit better, but also affords the opportunity to provide additional technical assistance. Now, we talked about that everybody can ask lots of questions to the grants administrators. So if you do have questions, feel free to contact them and ask. But one of the biggest questions that most people has is, how do I get reimbursed? And so the first thing that we need to keep in mind is that we created a budget within our application. And you really have to understand that budget to be able to create your reimbursements. You will be completing reimbursements for actual expenditures during 1-month periods using the approved line items that you created from your budget. We require that all grants submitting a reimbursement to the GCC use the expense summary pages or the expense category summary pages. These documents can be uploaded using the checklist that's found on the GCC website into our Grants Enterprise Management System, or GEMS. The checklist contains many items, but first it has the required cover sheets for expenditures. These are personnel, supplies, contractual, travel, and equipment. We do ask that whenever possible that you try to scan everything into the GEMS system portrait style. This is going to help us to be able to view it and keep our grants administrators from having to reorient everything that gets scanned in. The expense cover sheets should be labeled with a category label such as A, B, C, D, and E. And so just to give you an example, personnel would be A1, supplies B1, and contractual would be C1. All supporting documents will be included within each category behind the cover sheet to form the expense category reimbursement packet. Supporting documents should be labeled with the category identifier and the page number. And so an example of this is the supporting documents under personnel can be cover sheet, which could be labeled A1, your time sheet, which would be labeled A2, your payroll register labeled A3, and of course, a proof of payment labeled A4. This will allow your grant administrators to quickly locate the items within your packet, but also if you have a question in regards to your reimbursement, it will allow them to answer your questions quicker. When you upload the packets to GEMS, you will upload each expense category separately. So you may have 5 different uploads for each reimbursement. Reimbursements are going to be due the last day of the month for actual expenditures made during the previous month. So if it's September the 30th, 2020, your August reimbursement is due. If you submit on time in GEMS, your reimbursement, our grants administrators have a goal of providing processing to the reimbursement within 10 days. Now, processing means that they will approve, deny, or send back for modifications. If you are beyond the timeline, the 30th of the month, then our grants administrators have 30 days to process the reimbursement. A couple notes to keep in mind. DPS Fiscal does not process reimbursements the last week of the month. Now, this is important based on the pay schedule and can delay payment if you submit during that time. Final reimbursements are due 45 days after the period of performance is complete. In all cases, you can submit your reimbursements early. A couple things that I wanted to comment on before leaving you to our next section. Documentation keeps us and you from having audit findings, and even more importantly, keeps us from having to repay federal funds. GCC must have adequate documentation in order to prevent this from happening to you, audits or repayment of federal funds. Now, this documentation includes proof of payment, and this is key, that you have to have proof of payment of each one of your expenses in the form of a bank statement or a canceled check. Now I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Valari Hunter to share information on personnel and employee benefits.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everyone. What are personnel and employee benefits? Personnel and employee benefits consist of items such as salary, paid leave, Medicare, Social Security, health care benefits, as well as retirement. So now let's take a look at the supporting documentation required for personnel and fringe benefits reimbursement. The first required document is the employee's pay stub. Required elements of the pay stub are the employee's legal name, gross wages, total hours worked, rate of pay or salary, the pay period start and end dates, the pay date, as well as all deductions for taxes, benefits, etc. Here you will see a sample pay stub containing the required items previously mentioned. Now, the pay stub also contains benefits paid by the employer, can also contain benefits paid by the employer. Now, if the employer paid benefits are not listed on the pay stub, additional documentation is required for reimbursement for fringe benefits. The additional documentation will include the provider billing statement for the reimbursement period. And this statement will contain the coverage period, the covered employees with type of coverage, and the employee cost, as well as the total amount due. Now, in addition to that billing statement, you will also need to provide the proof of total payment to the provider, as well as benefits cost allocation sheets for agencies with multiple funding sources. Next, I will discuss the time and activity sheets. So there are two types of time and activity sheets. First is the single funding source timesheet, and the other is the multiple funding source timesheet. Now, the personnel requirement of your organization and GCC project will determine the appropriate time and activity sheet for each employee. The single funding source timesheet will be used by employees contributing time or cash match to one funding source, meaning the employee will be working 100% on one project. Now, on the other hand, the multiple funding source timesheet is required for employees contributing time to more than one funding source or project and whose salary is paid by more than one funding source. Now, the timesheet must contain hours worked during the reimbursement period for all funding sources. A few things to note about the timesheet are: one, all fields requested in the timesheet are required and must be completed for reimbursement. Now, the employee's legal name is required on all documents, and the employee name must match the name on the pay stub. Third, the employee name and position title on the timesheet must correspond with the information submitted in GEM. Most importantly, the time and activity sheet must be signed by the employee and the authorizing official. Now, the personnel cover page must be submitted with personnel benefits reimbursement request. Now, instructions for completing the personnel cover page can be found at the bottom of the form. And a key thing to remember regarding the personnel cover page is each item will be listed, each item listed on the personnel cover page represents a personnel budget line item, such as a salary position or the total sum of the employer-paid fringe benefit for the reimbursement period for items such as FICA, reimbursement, and hospitalization. Now, each fringe benefit total sum will be entered on separate lines. GCC is required to ensure only authorized grant-funded employees are approved for reimbursement, as well as services are being provided. So as a result, notification of employee separation and new hires are required. Notifications will be submitted by email to your GCC grant administrator within 10 working days of the personnel change. The notification is required to contain the employee's name, position title, salary, benefits, as well as last date of employment for an employee separation or the effective date for new hires. Thank you for your time.
Okay, and next we'll have Desiree to share some information in regards to equipment.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Desiree Nyan. I am a grants administrator and a team lead here at GCC. I will be speaking to you today about supporting documentation for equipment and consultant or contractors. Supporting documentation for equipment must include receipts, invoices, or other documentation supporting the purchase of the equipment. Also must be included is the three copies of bids from vendors are required when equipment is $10,000 or greater or per your agency's policies. If there is only one provider, a sole provider form will need to be completed for the precise equipment you are trying to purchase. This form will have the justification on why you are choosing a sole source provider. Property tags are required for all equipment purchased with grant funds and a value of $5,000 or more. Property control record and equipment certification form are required for all equipment purchased with the grant funds, which needs to be uploaded in GEMS under attachments. All the above items should be accessible during the site visit and when submitting your reimbursements. This is the sole source provider request form, which is located on our GCC website. All fields of this form must be completed. Please note that if the purchase is more than $250,000, there must be a prior approval from the Department Office of Justice Programs. Check the reasons for the request, and if other is selected, you must provide an explanation. Your grant administrator will then approve or deny your request, and the form will be uploaded to the project for future reference. Here are some examples of the property tags that are required for all equipment. They must have a unique number assigned to them for tracking the equipment purchased by the grant funds. The top of the property control record and equipment certification form must be completed, and the project director must sign off on the form. The rest of the form has multiple sections for different equipment. This section, for example, contains the item description, serial numbers, date of the transaction completed, the cost, and other relevant information. Page 2 of this form will have the project director need to sign off. Okay, the cover sheet is required when submitting a reimbursement request. Project name, the number, and the reporting period are required, preferably by the month when it is purchased. Example of the reporting period should be October 1st, 2020 through October 31st, 2020. Additional instructions are provided below regarding how to finish the remaining form. Next, I will be addressing the supporting documentation for consultant and contractors. Please provide the draft agreement or unexecuted contract to GCC stating the work to be performed and costs associated with the work. Invoices being submitted must clearly display the vendor's name, date of service, hours worked, payment amount due for the service, and a list or description of the services delivered from the consultant or contractor. Be aware of the cap amount of $81.25 per hour and not to exceed $650 per day without GCC prior approval. Also remember to have this done 10 business days prior to the beginning of the agreement or the contract. A few good examples of the consultant and contractors are counselors, lawyers, software and hardware computer engineers, therapists, ground maintenance staff. While volunteers, board members, and employees do not qualify as consultants or contractors and are an unallowable cost. Prior to committing into a contract, you as a subrecipient must complete GCC's pre-contract request form and submit a copy of the unexecuted contract to GCC for review and approval. Again, approvals may take up to 10 business days. Submit as early as possible to avoid delays. If the consultant or contractor is conducted by an individual and an agent and not an agency, a resume must also be submitted to GCC. Remember, the capped amount is $81.25 per hour and not to exceed the $650 per day. Otherwise, a contract excess rate form must be submitted along with the pre-contract request form, a copy of the unexecuted contract, and a resume if necessary. On the pre-contract request form, complete all the required fields and the project director will sign off on the form. The bottom section of this is to be completed by your grants administrator. Remember that a new contract will be required for your new grant, and submission of a new pre-contract request form will be needed. Note, contracts should not cross over to a new grant period. If over the cap amount, the following form will be utilized. This is the contract excess rate request form. Some of the required information needed are the scope of work, request hourly rate, rate per day not to exceed amount, federal share to be reimbursed, the match share to be allocated. If it's zero, please put zero, grant period, a valid justification, and also the project director must sign off on this form. The bottom section of this form will be completed by your grants administrator. And this is the final form that I will be discussing this morning. Remember, reimbursements submitted must have this contractual cover sheet filled out with the proper supporting documentation behind it, which should include invoice, proof of payment, and a bank statement. The information on the form should be the same information as in GEMS. Additional instructions are located on the bottom of the form. Please remember that all these forms are available on GCC website. Thank you.
Okay, and now Carolyn Locklear will share more information on travel and training.
Good morning. This is Carolyn Locklear. I'm Grant Administrator Team Lead for GCC, and I'll be discussing travel and training for employees and volunteers only. Many agencies allocate funds for staff training and development and for the staff to attend conferences. To make sure your agency is reimbursed properly, you must provide all receipts and expenses associated with the conference, including registration, conference agenda, lodging, airfare, taxi, or car rental receipts. Meals and mileage are based on your agency's travel policy. If your agency does not have a policy, then the state per diem rate will apply. You can find the state per diem rate by visiting gsa.gov. You must submit a mileage log form for each employee's mileage reimbursement. Even though out-of-state travel is already included and approved in your initial budget or budget adjustment prior approval, a budget adjustment or prior approval is still required. This is the prior approval request form for out-of-state travel, and it must be completed with all details about the out-of-state travel. Include the name and dates of the conference, an agenda or website with the conference information and details, budgeted cost, and attendees, and all attendees attending the event at least 90 days prior to the planned travel. Keep in mind that VOCA funds cannot be used to attend a VAWA conference. When requesting reimbursement for your travel, the travel cover sheet must be completed and submitted with all supporting documentation and receipts only after the travel has taken place, not prior to the event. You can refer to the instructions at the bottom of the form for directions on how to fill the form out completely. Next, supplies and operating expenses. Receipts, receipts, receipts. I cannot stress the importance of having receipts when submitting your reimbursements for requests. Make sure that for every expenditure, you provide invoices, utility bills, and proof of payment. Make sure that the documentation includes the invoice number, the vendor's name, the date of service, the amount paid, and the service that was performed or the items purchased. There are three methods to identify and divide up expenses for receipts between different grants. The easiest way is the first method, which you will provide a separate receipt for each grant for the items that you purchase. The second way, if you have to make a combined purchase, then attach the documentation explaining what items were purchased for each grant. Remember to submit copies of the receipt for both reimbursement requests for each grant. The third way, if you have to make a combined purchase, is to highlight on the receipt which items were purchased for each grant. Remember to submit the receipt and all documentation when requesting a reimbursement. This is an example of an invoice that shows the stamp date entered for payment. The invoice has the name of the company providing the service, the due date, and the amount of the invoice for the services performed. Proof of payment. The accepted proof of payment are copies of cleared checks or canceled checks that shows the endorsement side of the check. A cleared check is available as a scanned image from the online bank account. A credit card or bank statement should contain the cardholder's name and address, summary of account information such as the payment due and your balance, and all other details relevant to the transaction being requested for reimbursement. Make sure you identify on your credit card or bank statement the transaction and the amount that you are asking to be reimbursed for. To summarize, acceptable proof of payments are bank statements showing expense, cleared checks, invoice showing detailed paid, and receipt showing the expense was paid. A receipt is any document that contains the following 5 required elements, which are the name of the vendor or the person that was paid, a transaction date, a description of the goods purchased or the services provided, amount and form of payment. Here we have an example of a proof of payment, a check produced by Intuit Payroll. Along with the copy of the check, a bank statement should be submitted to show that the check was cleared from the bank. Next, we have a copy of a payroll check showing it was deposited into an employee's account. If your staff get paid via direct deposit, make sure that the payroll department or payroll agency specify that somewhere on the pay stub. So you can see on this pay stub that it says direct deposit. Next, here's the front and back copy of a cleared canceled check that clearly shows that the check was endorsed and paid. When requesting reimbursement on supplies, make sure you include the supply cover sheet. You can refer to the instructions at the bottom of the form for directions on how to fill it out completely. Make sure to attach all supporting documentation and proof of payment discussed during the presentation so that your grant administrator can process your reimbursement in a timely manner and without delay. Thank you so much.
Okay, and next up, Roxana Zalata Lewis will share more in regards to cash versus in-kind matches.
Jason, this is Caroline. I'm sorry to interrupt Roxana. I apologize.
Sure.
Oh, we gave you some bad advice early on. We told you to direct your questions to all panelists. And what that means is that other attendees aren't seeing your questions, so we're getting the same question multiple times. If you have questions in the chat, just direct them to everyone, and then we'll reply to everyone so everyone can see. Apologies for interrupting. I'm sorry.
No, very good advice. Thank you very much for that. And we do have a couple people who are monitoring the chat. So if you do have questions, please put them in there. We're answering questions as they come available in the chat. And at the end, if we don't get to some of those questions, we'll try to answer those at the end of the presentation, time permitting. So Roxana, I'm going to toss it back over to you for information in regards to match.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everyone. My name is Roxana Zalata Lewis, and I will be talking to you about match. Cost sharing or match refers to the resources or funds the grantees are required to contribute or allocate to accomplish the objectives of the project. Match is the portion not paid by the federal funds. Funds allocated as match, as well as costs incurred as match, and are utilized for the project's operations are governed by restrictions and regulations that specify what can be counted as match and how these funds must be documented. Grant agreements specify what sources of match funds can be used and which types of match funds are allowed. Therefore, if the cost is not allowable under the federal award, it is not allowable as match. Keep in mind that unless your project's match has been waived, you are required to meet your match contribution before the close of the project. If you don't meet the match, you will be required to pay back the federal funds. Match is usually described as a percentage of the total amount of the project. As you can see on the example, a 20% match of a $100,000 project will be $20,000. So to determine your match amount, take the total amount of your award and multiply that by the match percentage required by the funder. There are two types of match: cash match, also known as hard match, and in-kind match, also known as soft match. Federal grants typically require the match contribution to come from a non-federal source. Cash match is the most common type of match. An allowable cash match includes costs and expenditures that are allowable under the federal award. Sources of cash match are either the grantee's own funds or general revenue, cash donations from non-federal third parties, or other non-federal grants. Cash match is an actual cash contribution to the project, such as cash expenditure for costs related to the project, project-related staff salaries, consultants' fees, equipment, rent and rentals, and travel costs. Listed on this slide are the line items on your budget that can be used for cash match: salaries and benefits, travel, equipment, operating expenses and supplies, and consultants and contractors. Make sure that you keep track of your cash match to ensure that you're meeting your stated match goal. If the match goal is not met, your agency may be required to refund a portion of the federal funds awarded for your project. The other type of match is in-kind match or soft match. In-kind match contributions that come from the grantee agency in the form of personnel, goods, and services, including direct, indirect, and indirect deposits. As described in the slide, in-kind match are non-cash contributions such as volunteer time or donations of goods and services directly benefiting the project, including donated equipment, space, and utilities. For example, if in-kind match is permitted by the federal award, then the value of the donated services can be used to comply with the match requirement, as do third-party in-kind contributions, as long as those contributions are expended as allowable costs. In-kind contributions can be free meeting or office space in a church basement or library room that you will otherwise have to pay rent for it or pay for renting the space. Supplies donated by local businesses to use for fundraising events, and carpenters, painters, or local handymen who volunteer their services to your agency for the project. In-kind must be documented. Volunteer services must be documented and supported by the same methods used to document regular employees' time and attendance records. Time and activity sheets must be signed by an approving official. An approving official could be the immediate supervisor of the employee, and include a description of the work performed directly benefiting the project. Hourly rates for volunteer services should be consistent with hourly rates paid to regular staff performing the same work. If there is no comparison available, then rates should be consistent with those rates paid for similar work in the labor market. Donations of goods such as equipment, clothing, or items used to further the goals of your project must be given a fair market value to determine the allowable value as in-kind match. Under Part 2, Section 200-306 of the Code of Federal Regulations, it is required that any matching funds and all contributions meet the criteria listed on the slide. Make sure that your contributions are verifiable on your records and are necessary and reasonable to achieve your project's goals and objectives. Make sure that your contributions are not included as contributions for any other federally assisted project and are not paid by the federal government under another grant. Resources spent on one project should only be counted as match for a single project. Make sure your match costs are allowable and approved in the project's budget. For in-kind match contributions, make sure to document these areas. Who is the source? Ensure that your agency can demonstrate that the contribution is from an acceptable donor source. What was donated? That your agency can demonstrate that the item being used, that was donated, that they demonstrate that the item or whatever was donated is used as, and that you're using as match is suitable for match. Be specific and show how it relates to your project's goals and objectives. How is the value determined? The donor should generally determine the value, and it should be based on a standard objective sources such as fair market value rather than best guesses. Who verified the information? Who certified that the information is correct? Is there a responsible party who's prepared to sign that the information is true and correct on that donation? All these requirements are specifically important for audit purposes and to make sure all your match adheres to the requirements specified on the Code of Federal Regulations. Always keep in mind the match contributions are subject to the same rules and the same supporting documentation as any other expenditure made with the project's funds, as discussed earlier in the presentation. Although your agency's matching contributions can be applied at the end of your project period, your agency must consider how this will impact the utilization or expenditure rate during the year, since it may appear that your agency is not meeting the required expenditure rates. At the end of the program year, any remaining federal and match funds from the first year will be frozen and moved to the surplus line item, and you will need to complete a budget adjustment once year 2 of your project begins to allocate funds in the surplus line. And to finalize, it's very important that you keep records that clearly show the source, amount, and timing of your match contribution. If you have any questions about your match, please contact your grants administrator. Thank you.
Thank you, Roxana. Next up, we're going to have Burley Spinks, who's going to talk to us a little bit about reporting.
Good morning. First thing, timely reporting is critical to GCC's continual funding. Therefore, we need you as the subrecipient to complete your reports to us and other federal agencies in an accurate and timely fashion. Please be aware, sanctions will be imposed on subrecipients who do not submit reports in a timely manner. Listed are required reports and due dates for all subrecipients. Please note, the Notice of Grant Implementation and Initial Sub-Grant Reward Report are due immediately after your grant is opened. Expense reimbursements are due monthly once the expense has occurred. TNT reports are on a quarterly basis, and these reports are due 30 days after the period of the report. This means if the quarterly report is from October 2020 to December 2020, your report is due by January 30th, 2021. Please refer to this slide for the remaining quarterly PMT reports and their due dates. Also, please make note, the project progress report is due 30 days after your budget year. During your breakout session, there will be required dates for reports that pertain to the type of grant you have, such as JJ, VAWA, VOCA, and Burn JAG. Please govern yourself accordingly. Audit financial reporting. North Carolina State Law, General Statute 143C-6-23 requires every non-governmental entity that receives state and federal pass-through grant funds from a state agency to file annual reports on how those grant funds were used. Specific requirements for each funding level are as follows. Level 1 is for the grants less than $25,000. The required documents needed is a certification form and a state grant compliance reporting for receipts less than $25,000. The above mentioned form and reporting form must be submitted to the web address in bold. Level 2 is for grants between $25,000 and $499,999. Notice, 2 additional forms are required with the additional forms in Level 1. These forms are the Schedule of Receipts and Expenditures and Program Activities and Accomplishments Report. As you can see, please send these documents all to the address noted in bold. Level 3 are for grants between $500,000 and $749,999. The 3 forms needed and submitted to the first email in bold is the certification form, the state grants compliance reporting for receipts of $25,000 or more, and program activities and accomplishments reports. Please pay attention that you must also submit to DPS internal audit at the second web address in bold a single audit prepared and completed in accordance with general accepted government auditing standards. The second part of Level 3 are for grants that are $750,000 and more. You have the same requirements as for grants between $500,000 and $749,000. However, you must also post a single audit to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. Please make note of the web address in bold at the bottom of that page. Budget adjustments and the 10% rule. Non-budgetary adjustments are for grant period extensions and personnel changes. Monetary budget adjustments are to reallocate funds and to increase funds. Budget adjustments must be initiated when you change a scope of a project. If you want to add a new category to your budget, for example, would be if you decide to add travel to your existing budget, and travel was not part of your initial budget. Another reason for a budget adjustment would be if you want to move funds from one line to another. This example would be moving funds from personnel to supplies. Finally, you want to increase an existing line on your budget. That would be if you have a certain amount in personnel and you want to increase that amount in personnel, you would need to do a budget adjustment. Please remember, when you submit a budget adjustment modification, you must submit it through GEMS in the form of a monetary budget adjustment. With any budget modification, a 10% cap is in place for grants $250,000 and greater, and there is no limit on the number of monetary budget adjustments you submit to GCC. Also, match funds does require a monetary budget adjustment. However, the match is not counted towards the 10% gap. Once you are allowed to move 10% of the total grant award, any other adjustments will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis for approval or denial. Also, if you receive additional funds that will increase your total amount of your grant dollars, the 10% cap will be increased to include the additional funds. Budget modification adjustments will be denied if the reason for the adjustment exceeds the 10% of the total grant, is inconsistent with the grant purposes, is unallowable, does not support or further the program. Another denial is subplanning. This is when federal funds are used to pay for things like services rendered, staff positions, programs, or materials that are usually paid by or with state or local funds. And lastly, budget adjustments not submitted 60 days before the end of the period of performance. Please do not hesitate to contact your grants administrator if you have any questions or concerns. We are here to help and assist you, and that we will find the answers to your questions if we do not know it. Thank you.
Burley, thank you very much. Oftentimes, we get questions from our subrecipients as to how do I best work with my grants administrator. So we've developed a little bit of a panel discussion with our presenters today. I'm going to ask each of them some questions that you have posed to us, and we'll start kind of broad, and then we'll focus in on the communication and expectation when working with grants administrators. And I'm going to stop sharing so we can see the videos. The first question that we have, and since Burley was already speaking first, we'll toss it out to him, is what is the typical day of a grant administrator like?
Thank you. As a grant administrator, our first priority would be to come into our office. We usually open our emails, try to address them as soon as possible. We may have several emails there, so it may take some time to answer them. We then would look at our phone messages, recording our messages, writing them down, so then we could respond back to our phone calls. Lastly, what we would do, and well, not lastly, but included in that, we have reimbursements, budget adjustments, non-budgetary adjustments. And what we do is try to prioritize those items. So if your reimbursement, you submit a reimbursement, and you have your cover sheets, you have all the information needed to approve that reimbursement. Your reimbursement may take an hour to complete. It may even be shorter than that. But if we receive a reimbursement where we have to study, to investigate, and to look at things, it may take longer. So reimbursements and how you submit your reimbursements are very important, and that it would help speed up the process, or it could slow it down. But then in this process, we also have training, we have meetings that we attend. So our day is real compact, and we use all of our 8 hours and even more. All right. So be patient with us, and we are here to help, and we will address anything that you have.
Thank you, Burley. Going along with that just a little bit, Roxana, I wonder if you might be able to share some high-level things that you think our subrecipients should know about working with our different grant administrators.
Thank you, Jason. Absolutely. First and foremost is that grant administrators are here to help you. We want to make sure that your agency does not have to repay federal funds or receive an audit finding in case that any of your agency's transactions are pulled by an auditor. I know that within the last few years, there have been changes to policies and procedures that GCC asks you to follow. This is most often due to an audit or monitoring recommendation that we must implement. We ask that you listen to your grant administrator and that you ask for clarification if you're not certain about any of those changes. Thank you.
So one of the questions that I get asked quite a bit is, will my grant administrator change? And then the follow-up question a lot of times is, what causes these changes? I have to tell you, we have been expanding our staff, and so we do have a lot of new staff members. So our grant administrators hopefully will have less grants so that they can provide more customer service to you. Now that, of course, is dependent upon how much funding that we receive. So if we receive a lot more funding, we would still have to provide grants to grant administrators to be able to work with. But our goal is to try to get our customer service to be as efficient and supportive as possible of all of our subrecipients. Adding staff does cause the projects to be shifted among new staff members, and so you will see from time to time your grant administrator will change. That being said, one of the questions that I received from the subrecipients, I'd like to pose to Carolyn. I have a new grant administrator and am afraid they will not be as capable as my old administrator. Can you provide any reassurance for us as subrecipients?
Sure, I can. First of all, let me tell you that your grant administrator is here to ensure that you are successful in completing your application and your project. Second of all, we start out our training process with the DOJ Administrative Financial Training Guide that each grant administrator must go through, and they must pass a test at the end of the training. Second of all, we have also created a 9 to 10 module training for each grant administrator to go through, which was created by one of our own, Ms. Andrea Russo. And the grant administrators will go through that process as well, along with their team lead, to ensure that they understand both the GEM system and the CRM system before they are assigned a caseload. You can also assure that they will have mentoring from their grant administrator, as well as a team member to shadow them when they go to site visits, to ensure that they understand the proper process of conducting monitoring during a site visit. So I can assure you that we are here and we have your best interest at heart, and that the new grant administrators will be just as good as your previous grant administrator. Thank you.
Roxana, I'm going to come back to you for a second question. What do you feel is the best way to contact your grant administrator, and how quickly should a subrecipient expect a reply back?
Sure, Jason. Because the work is conducted electronically through a computer, it is always good practice to have a record of communication. Email is the best form of communication if you have a technical question that will require examples or a detailed explanation. This allows the grant administrator to reference the communications in case, and to ensure that they have the answer we're communicating back with you. Grant administrators are available by phone, and we do receive our phone calls from the office to our computers and mobile phones while we're away from the office. So our goal is to provide communication back to you within 24 hours. If you don't hear from us within the allotted time, don't panic. We may not have the answer yet, but we will let you know that we're working on it. Make sure you provide, one thing that I think is very important is for you to make sure to provide your grant administrator with a direct phone number for your project director or executive director, and staff involved with preparing the reimbursement request for any questions that require a prompt response from you. Thanks.
Yeah, great answer. And one of the things to keep in mind is that our grants administrators, as Burley alluded to, have packed out schedules. So we will do our best to communicate back with you in 24 hours. We may have to let you know that we'll get back in touch with you later to do some research or something like that, but we are going to do our best to try to communicate as quickly as possible. Following that, Valarie, I wanted to ask a question of you as well. Who do I contact if I cannot reach my grant administrator?
Well, Jason, we have 3 team leads that provide second-level reviews for all our reimbursements and budget adjustments, and they are accessible to subrecipients if you cannot reach the grant administrator. Now, our team leads are Desiree Young, Carolyn Locklear, and Tanya Auburn. Now, you may also feel welcome to contact our grants manager director, Jason. And Jason and the team leads can provide you an update or information as to whether or not something suddenly came up and the grant administrator is not available. But as Roxana and you said, please keep in mind to allow us 24 hours to provide a response to you.
Thank you, Valarie. I would like to pose this question to Desiree. Desiree, I have an opportunity to expand services as a subrecipient, and I'd like to get some additional funds to be able to do that in my grant. Is this possible first? And then how do I approach my grant manager to do this?
Yes, Jason. Oh my gosh, this is awesome opportunity for you to expand your services. That is terrific. So yes, it is possible to ask for additional funds depending on the funding availability. First, it starts with a conversation, of course, with your grant administrator. Second, your grant administrator will ask for you to complete a request form provided by your grant administrator detailing the requested amount, and an explanation of the additional funds will be utilized for the project. Third, the grant administrator will then provide the form to the grant to GCC planners for approval. Finally, If you may have to wait until we know if the funds are reverted or remain from previous years' projects, and you will be notified. If you are provided an approval, a budget adjustment will be needed to be submitted by the subrecipient in GEM.
Great. Thank you, Desiree. And thanks for letting everybody know of the opportunity to be able to request some additional federal funding if they do need it and if they have a project expansion. Do keep in mind, it's not a guarantee, meaning that it does have to go through an approval process, and it's quite possible that the funds might not be available. So don't count on the funds being available until you have heard back that they've been approved if you do request additional funds. One of the things that a lot of subrecipients comment to me, especially new subrecipients, is that when they hear that they're going to be monitored, they will say something like, well, is this like an audit? And I want to make sure that everybody understands that as we do come in and we do look at lots of things like the audit, don't think of this when we come in to monitor as an audit. We're coming in as your friends to try to look at everything that you have and provide any advice that we can back to you. So in that vein, I wanted to ask Burley, how as a subrecipient do you prepare for a site visit?
If you are a VOCA grant funds recipient, then you are required to have a site visit once every 2 years at a minimum. If you have additional funds and a VOCA grant, GCC may incorporate your other grants in with that VOCA site visit. First, you should ensure that you have strong internal controls and that you have policies established for required documents, internal controls, and financial management. Make sure you keep your records for those you provide services that match the performance reports and reimbursement request. Your grants administrator will send you a request for a site visit with tentative dates. Please respond. Once you set that date for the site visit, the grant administrator will send a list of documents they will either need sent to them or provided when they arrive on site. Please ensure that these are provided on the dates requested.
Great, thank you, Burley. And so preparing for a site visit really is making sure that you do all the things that you have to do to efficiently and effectively operate, manage your grant, and provide all the documentation that we've been talking about through the presentation earlier this morning. In the same vein, and to alleviate any fears and anxieties of what might take place during a site visit, Carolyn, I'd like to ask you, what should I expect in a site visit as a subrecipient?
Yes, Jason, what you should be expecting when I come to your organization for a site visit, you should be expecting that I will be there on time and that my agenda will be set and I will not deviate from my agenda. As well, you should expect that I am there to be helpful to you and that I am there to ensure that you have all your policies and procedures in place, everything that you have submitted to GCC by way of reimbursements, that I will be verifying that you have those documentations at the site. Also, you can assure that I will be reviewing your financial documents as well as looking to see your whatever you use for your financials, whether it's QuickBooks or Excel spreadsheet, whatever, I'll be looking at that. And also, I'll be monitoring your database that you use to keep track of your victims that you serve for GCC, as well as tour your organization, your office space. If you have a shelter, I would like to go and visit your shelter to ensure that you do have victims in the shelter and that what the information you're providing us is actually accurate and complete. And also you can assure that at the end of the site visit, I will be doing a closing to inform you any issues that we have found, give you a resolutions on how to handle those issues, and also commend you for a job well done. And that's what you should expect from your grant administrator at a site visit. Thank you.
Carolyn, thank you very much. For those that do have the VOCA grants, these site visits, as Burley and Carolyn have been speaking about, are once every 2 years. However, if you also have VAWA grants or some other type of grant that GCC has provided to you, we may choose to also monitor those at the same time. And so they may ask to pull material from other grants that you have with GCC at the same time that they come to monitor your VOCA grants. Well, that concludes our sort of nuts and bolts presentation this morning for the plenary session. Wanted to see if we had any questions within the chat box, and so I'm opening the chat here. It does look like that we have had great moderators within the chat who have been answering questions as we've gone along.
Jason, it's Caroline. Real quick, I just want to let everybody know that they should have received in an email from Josh Rottenberry on our team. So for everybody that was registered, not only the manual and the agenda, but the links for the breakout session. They're also being posted right now in the chat. So if you might want to cut and paste those, if you did not get them via email, just wanted to clarify that. Also, just a quick clarification, our GEMS system, the system GCC uses, is not going down. We had several questions about that. It is the federal GMS system that is moving to a new system called Just Grants. So it's the system that we communicate with the feds with. So just for a little bit of clarity, our GEMS system will still be working.
Thank you, Caroline. And so I see that Josh has posted all the links into the chat. Does anybody have any additional questions? And if so, please do make sure to put them in the chat. We have a couple minutes that we could look to address some of these additional questions. If nobody has any additional questions, we may give you a little bit of time back to enjoy a break. And okay, so we've received one that is, how long would the match waiver request take to process for approval? We submitted several weeks ago and cannot submit for reimbursement while it is processing. And so if you have submitted a match waiver request, if it's for an older grant that is open that's going to be closing, say, September 30th, we have worked through processing all of the match waiver requests, and I believe that our IT is trying to remove all of the match that was within each of the different budgets. And so if that hasn't taken place, please do email your grant administrator so that they can follow up, or myself, so that we can make sure that that match gets removed for you. I have one that says, I've been an LE grantee with GCC for over 10 years. This has been one of the most informative and best trainings you all have hosted. Thank you very much. Well, so I thought it was a question, sorry. Love the comments that are coming in. That is awesome. Does anybody have any other questions?
Come on, guys. There were a lot of questions coming in earlier, and we were trying to answer them fast and furious, but I know some slipped by me. Is there any question that didn't get answered earlier?
While we're waiting, I'll throw out, Caroline mentioned our guidelines book, which is posted to our website. All of the information that we've been covering in this session is also covered within the guidelines book. So you will have the advantage of having many different resources once you leave this training. Not only can you replay our entire presentation today on the GCC website, you'll be able to take a look at the guidelines book and see all of the policy that we've put into that guidelines book. And then the LMS modules will be a third thing that you'll be able to follow up with. We do plan to send invitations to everybody that's going to be a part of that LMS system so that they can get in and get further training in things like reimbursement requests, budget adjustments, opening grants, writing a grant, things like that. So you'll be getting more communication from us, letting you know how to access that information. I have one here that says, in regards to site visits, does GCC plan on doing virtual site visits for the upcoming year? Or will we return to doing physical site visits? And this is one that I love this question. We would love to return to regular site visits. It's easier to be able to sit face to face and have a discussion in regards to a project. It's also much easier to be able to see the things that we have to take a look at and put eyes on it. It's easier for you as subrecipients as well, because you don't have to carry around cameras to show us everything that we're trying to look for. We very much appreciate everybody bearing with us as we did these remote site visits and have been trying to figure out the best way to do this and provide technical assistance to you. And we appreciate you also in some of them following back up and sending us all the documents and everything that is needed for these remote site visits. We know it's a big ask. We hope that we can go back to doing regular site visits, but it's all dependent upon what the pandemic and the restrictions that we were under really allow. And so once we're able to travel again, and then the state did freeze traveling, but once we're able to travel a little bit more, we'll let you know when we resume doing the site visits in person. Someone asked for clarification about who should provide the second signature on checks. Authorizing official will state in the presentation, she asked for clarification. And so yes, all checks should have two signatures on it. And I may kick this one over to Carolyn Locklear as one of our panelists to answer who really should be the two signatures that you have on a check.
It depends on your policy that you have in place with your organization, but definitely your financial officer should be one of those that signs the checks. So if your policy from your board says that it's the project director and the financial officer, that's who should be signing the checks. But you need to refer back to your policy for your check writing procedures on who should be signing your checks.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Ms. Carolyn, there was also a question about second signatures on timesheets that I'm not sure got answered.
Oh, yes, the employee should be signing their timesheet, and the project director or the supervisor of that employee to certify that the hours that they have placed on their time and activity sheet are accurate.
Great, thank you, Carolyn. One of the other questions that we've got in here has to do with the guidelines book. And it says in the past, we were able to pick it up at the training, and it's very helpful to have a hard copy of the book. We totally understand that. However, we apologize, but we are limiting how people are received within our office also. So if you come into our office, expect to be temperature checked and the full Monty of questions asked of your health and well-being, because we're trying to protect all our employees as everybody else is as well. That's the reason, part of the reason that we went to this online manual that we've created. It's a PDF and it's searchable as well. So doing a control click feature, you can go through all of the items that are in the appendices and you can search for anything that you're looking for. The other cool thing is that if you do a control F feature for a find, you can type in there almost any word and it'll show you where every one of those words are located, which makes it very easy when you want to jump to different types of things like reimbursements or something like that. This is available for download on the GCC website. And so as a PDF, it downloads fairly quickly. And you can put it on your laptop to be able to use or computer device. And then that way it makes it so that you can find things very quickly as well within that guidebook. We don't have the ability to print them this year, so we are not planning to print one for everybody, but you're welcome to print it if you'd like. We have streamlined it, and it is less pages than it was in the past. And so you'll find that it's a little bit easier reading. However, allow a little bit of time if you decide that you're going to read it from cover to cover. Got a question in here that says, it sounds like if we have surplus funds at end of year one due to COVID-19 closing of office and staff salary excess, could we ask for a new position that is needed to be added as a salary line item? I'm sure this is a conversation with our grants manager. That's a great question. And yes, due to COVID, we have been allowing people to do different things with their salary lines. And a lot of this has to do with things like adding hazard pay or something like that. But the grants administrator certainly can help you with this question. All technical questions that you may have, feel free to pose to the grants manager. This is something that we could take a look at. It looks like you're going from year 1 to year 2, and so that would be okay. However, if we were very close, and a lot of our grants are to the very end of the grant or the closing period, we've already passed the deadline for budget adjustments. And so those budget adjustments, if there's anything that needs to be done at this point, it should be reimbursements that are being sent in and then sent in after the period of performance.
Hey, Jason, this is Caroline, real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody had asked about how to receive the recording later. It is going to be posted on our website, as will the PowerPoints, as we also were just talking about the manual. Please give us a couple of days. I don't know how long it's going to take to download the entire workshop and put it on, but it will eventually be available online.
They can run that play someday. I don't want to run this play.
Miss Carolyn, we can hear you. Also, Jason, we will be sending out either via your WebEx notification or once both of our workshops is done, a survey. A lot of you are saying you prefer this. I know some of you may, meaning a virtual workshop. I know some of you may not. We will be conducting a survey, so if you want to, give us feedback on whether you liked it this way or didn't like that way, we would really, really appreciate it. Encourage you to take a few minutes to complete that.
That's great. And really, we've exhausted our time for this session. And so we did want to allow you guys to have a little bit of a break before we get into our breakout sessions. Again, keep in mind, the breakout session links are published within this chat box that you'll see here. We have several different breakout sessions that'll be happening next. We have VOCA reporting, VALR reporting, JJ reporting, and CJI reporting. And just to orient you a little bit to those breakout sessions, based upon the funding source that you expect to receive or that you're receiving, you should attend the breakout session pertinent to that funding source or where you need to learn the most information. Keep in mind, all of these breakout sessions will also be recorded, and you'll be able to access them later on our website as well. So you can attend one and ask questions, and then you can view the other ones later on that you wanted to attend but may not have had the opportunity to. With that, thank you, everybody. We will see you in the breakout session. So we do have to log out of this WebEx and log back into another WebEx to be able to view the breakouts. Have a wonderful break. We'll see you in a few minutes.